Hey everyone, today I'm going to show you how I paint the Drukhari Mandrake kill team. So usually I start everything with using an airbrush, but in this instance I know a lot of people don't actually have airbrushes, so I'm going to be doing this whole model with a brush. So to begin with, we're just starting out with Dark Reaper, and all we're doing is just going over pretty much the full model, but I'm leaving all the black within the gaps. So I did actually start this whole model off as just a primer of black, and then I go over all the skin with Vallejo's matte black, and then once that's done I'm then going over with the Dark Reaper. And all I'm looking for here is just getting a pretty solid layer. Next up I'm just using Thunderhawk Blue, and all I'm doing is going within the previous layers, and I'm mainly going into like a sort of mid-tone sort of area where I'm staying within the Dark Reaper. So I'm mainly just going to be putting this where I think the light is mostly going to be hitting. If you want to find where the light does hit, you can prime the model. If you're using a satiny kind of finish to your primer, you can then shine a light on it and you should be able to just take a picture. Obviously you need to take a picture or aim the light in a specific way, and then that's where your light spots will be. That is a very super simple way of finding light spots. However, on this model itself, I am not doing that, and I'm just kind of eyeballing it. So for this kill team in particular, I wanted quite a quick recipe where I didn't have to put too much time into it and where the outcome is fairly decent. And the main thing that I'm trying to focus on is getting better at OSL, and I think these models are like the perfect models for it. Next up, we're just using Fenrisian Grey, and all we're doing with this one, again, every single time we're layering, we're just layering it within the previous layer that we just painted. So wherever we just painted the Thunderhawk Blue, we are just going to be doing a smaller area of that Thunderhawk Blue and painting it Fenrisian Grey. So when you're painting this layer, all you want to do is make sure that you're painting it where the light will be hitting the brightest point. For this layer in particular, I'm not doing any mixes, I'm going straight solid with the Fenrisian Grey. If you feel like you want to glaze and maybe do mixtures like 50-50 of Thunderhawk Blue and Fenrisian Grey, then go for it. It will make the blends a bit smoother. However, as I said, I just want to do this quickly and have like a nice little finish at the end. And as you'll see at the end, it all fits together nicely. Next up, I'm just going with Blue Horror, and I'm just doing specular highlights slash like little tiny patches of highlighting. I am going very light with this as it is a super bright color. I was umming and ahhing about it because I didn't know if I wanted to go that bright, but in the end I decided to just go with it. Next up, I'm just base coating everything in Corax white, so the flames and the hair. You can also do the runes, however, because I use a very bright fluorescent color, I don't bother in this instance. I would recommend that you do put a bit of white in the runes, so that will make the colors that you use pop a bit more. Once I've applied the Corax white over the top and got a nice solid layer, I'm just then coming in with Soulblight Grey. So I have put some water in with this, so it's like 1 part water, 1 part shade, and I'm just shading all of the hair. I'm not putting too much on, I'm just putting enough on just to create like a sort of filter and get into the recesses. If you do have too much on your brush, you can just dab some of the excess off, or if you do apply too much onto the model, just get a dry brush and just soak some of that up. While I'm waiting for the shade to dry, I then jump over to the cloak, and for this I'm just doing a layer of Mournfang Brown, and all I'm doing is just base coating, getting a nice full layer across the whole entire outside of the cloak. So throughout this video I do use a size 1 for all the basing, and then a 000 for most of the top highlights. And then for the metallics, I use a CItadel small layer brush, which is a synthetic. For inside of the cloak, all I'm doing is using Rakarth Flesh, and I'm applying multiple thin layers of this. I'm painting the whole of the inside of the cloak as Rakarth Flesh, and once this is done, this is going to be multiple different colours. Next up, I'm just using Lead Belcher, and I'm not doing anything special for these, for the metallics, but as I mentioned previously, I do use a separate brush for my metallics, and I also use a separate water pot for my metallics, just so I don't get any of the metallic-y mix on any of the non-metallics. Now, once the metallics are done, we're just going back to the hair, and all I'm doing for this is I've got some Ulthuan Grey, and I'm just going to be highlighting all the strands of hair and the top of the scalp. So for this, I'm just using the edge of my brush and the tip of my brush when I have to, and I'm just doing nice layers over the Corax white. Once the Ulthuan Grey is dry, we then come in with Bold Titanium White. Bold Titanium White is a super bright white. So for this, I am pretty much just going over all of the previous Ulthuan Grey, just leaving some of those in the recesses, and I'm also going over the scalp, which you'll see. I am going fairly slowly, obviously the video is sped up, but all I'm doing is just taking my time and making sure that I'm not spilling over into any of the recesses and where I've done the previous shading. Once I've done the main parts of the hair, I then come in with a very, very thin down layer of that bold titanium white. And all I'm doing with this is making some little lines in some of the more raised recess areas that aren't hair strands. Now that the hair is done, we're just going to go back into the inside of the cloak, and for this all we're going to be doing is using flayed one flesh. This is going to be one section of the inside of the cloak. Another section of the inside of the cloak we're just going to keep as Rakarth flesh, and the third section is going to be Bugman's glow, which I'll show you in a second. We're not doing anything special here, we're just blocking in all of the colours. All I'm doing here is just getting a nice layer of Bugman's glow over the top of the Rakarth flesh. Now I move back to the outside of the cloak, and for this all I'm doing is mixing a 50-50 mix of Mournfang brown and Scrag brown. With this I'm just going over the majority of the cloak itself. I'm picking out all of the raised edges and just making sure I get the majority of the cloak covered, while still leaving Mournfang brown in the recesses and the deepest parts of the cloak. I mainly paint all of this in volume highlights. Any like thin straight edges, then I do like a normal edge highlight. When it comes to cloaks, I don't really like the edge highlight too much, only the outside of the cloak. Any folds within the cloak, I try not to edge highlight it. I usually just do a volumetric highlight. Next highlight is pure Scrag brown, and all I'm doing with this is just picking out all of the raised edges and highlighting within the previous highlights. So the reason why we've done the previous 50-50 layer is so then this layer doesn't look as stand out and we can blend it in slightly. If you want to blend in further, you can create a glaze and just slowly just glaze and build up them layers to get a smoother blend of colour. For the next mix, I'm just using Scrag brown and Deathclaw brown. Similar to the last mix, we're just using a 50-50 mix, and this is just going to create a smoother transition between the colours. So again, all we're doing is going nice and slowly and just picking out all the raised edges and going with inside of the previous layers. And you can also start to pick out the edge highlights, and if you water it down some, you can then also create like little scratches and make it look like it's been in battle and look like it's worn down. For the last highlight I'm using Deathclaw brown, and with this I thinned it down quite a lot, and I'm just not glazing because I didn't use it as a full glaze, but it's getting towards a glaze, and all I'm doing is using this and getting the center points of the brightest areas. Going back to the inside part of the cloak, I am using Pallid Witch Flesh, and all I'm doing with this is just highlighting sort of the most raised edges. Once again, I'm only using this on the Rakarth flesh part and the flayed one flesh. For the Bugman's glow part of the inner cloak, I'm just coming in with a very basic skin recipe, which is Cadian flesh and then Kislev flesh over the top. So I'm mainly going over each part of the cloak and leaving the Bugman's glow in the recesses and the deepest parts of the inner cloak. Next up, I'm just painting the rope. So I'm starting off with a base coat of Mournfang brown. So I wanted to make this kind of like a golden rope. Next up I'm coming in with XV88, and this is yellowy brown, and this is what's going to make it look a little bit more golden, and then after that I'm going to come in with Balor brown. So this is actually part of a very common NMM gold that is used quite a lot, and this is why I figure like it's quite nice for like golden robes, where obviously you're not looking for like a metallic kind of look, but you're looking for like that golden sort of browny look. All I'm doing here is just highlighting all the raised edges and leaving the Mournfang brown in the recesses. So I do have this quite watered down, which in hindsight I probably should have not watered it down so much. As previously mentioned, I'm using Balor brown as the last final highlight. I'm not really pushing it any further than this, I'm just keeping it at Balor brown. Onto the OSL. Now for this I am using gold and fluorescent paints, and as I said earlier in the video, these paints are very, very high pigmented paints. I'm using this straight out of the pot, and you can see just how bright it is. These are fairly expensive products, but I personally think these are some of the best fluorescent paints there are within the miniature world. So all I'm doing here is just creating a nice base layer over the flames, and also you will see that I go straight into all the runes with just straight fluorescent paint. Now again, I'm keeping this very, very simple. I'm not going like deviating much between the different tones that you can have on OSL. I'm literally just doing straight fluorescent paint and doing a little contrast. This little OSL scheme is just going to be 3 colors. We have white, we have fluorescent green, and we have the contrast of warp lightning. So once we've done the main light source, all I'm doing is watering down heavily the fluorescent paint, and I'm just going around the outside of where the runes are and sort of on the arms and hands of the model. Now you may need to do a couple of coats of this as it is going to be a very, very thin layer. And at the moment I'm just going around the runes and arms. So I'm really sorry about this next part, but I accidentally didn't record some of the OSL effect that I was doing on the cloth and the skin. However, you can see me doing more. So I accidentally put a bit too much, a bit too heavy with the fluorescent paint. So I'm just doing a very watered down fluorescent paint over the top, sort of like a glaze. It basically is a glaze. And all I'm doing is ending my brush strokes at the highest points of where I think the OSL is going to be hitting the brightest. Now, if you do apply too much fluorescent paint or you put it on too thickly, you can just get some water and just water it down, or you can just get a dry paintbrush and just soak it all up. So when it comes to painting OSL, you think of it as a bubble around the light source. And that bubble will be, depending on how bright the light source is, it will vary. Obviously, the further away the body part or whatever you're painting is, the darker it will be and the less light impact it will have on the model. So all you're doing is painting the forward facing limbs, clothing, weapons, whatever that face the light source. When it comes to the flat panels, they will be darker, whereas all the edges should catch the most light. So with this, for the flat panels, I do a very thin layer of fluorescent paint, and then for the edges I do like several layers of watered down fluorescent paint just to make it look a bit more brighter than the flat panels. So I'm just continuing on with the fluorescent paint and building up the brightness of it. I won't be doing another Mandrake video, but I will be doing another video on how you paint the OSL using different techniques such as dry brushing or using the airbrush. This is mainly because I've had several comments asking for different methods of painting a concept. And I think this is a bit more manageable than painting several models in one video, as the video will go on for quite a while. And I also work a full-time job, so I don't think that's a very viable option for right now. But I do really enjoy painting OSL. I think it's so much fun, and I love the effect that it brings out. And it's super easy for anyone to do. With that being said, let's continue. Next up, I'm using Warp Lightning and Lamy Medium in a mix of 2 parts Lamy Medium and 1 part Warp Lightning. I would definitely say if you're using any contrasts and you want to water them down, use a medium. I find it helps the paint flow a lot better. And all we're doing with this mix is just going over the back ends of the flame to roughly about halfway. This is just nicely going to build up the contrasts of the darkness and the light, really bright fluorescent paint. Next up, I'm just using a mix of 2 parts Lamy Medium and 1 part Bold Titanium White. And all I'm doing with this is putting it in the deepest recesses and keeping it near the arm. Once the white is dried, we're just going to be taking a very watered down fluorescent green, and all we're going to be doing is layering over the top and sort of blending in the previous white layer. So you could do this through wet blending, you could do this through glazing, it's completely up to you. You can do it through dry brushing if you want to, but in this instance I'm just going to be layering over the top. And for the final part of the model, I'm just going to be doing Stormhost Silver on the metallics. So with this I'm just hitting all the raised areas and all the highest point areas. You can also do some really nice highlights on the blade. With that last piece done, the model is now complete. However, I do recommend using a varnish over the top, especially if you're using them on the tabletop. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's watched this far, and I hope you all enjoyed the video. I really appreciate the support, and I hope to see you in the next one.